Hey guys, welcome back to the latest episode of the Growing a Dental Practice podcast. I am your host, Mike Hennon from Patient Boost. In today's episode, I'm joined by Dr Simon Gallier, Managing Partner of Future Health Partnership. Future Health Partnership is based on employer ownership / partnership with 4 practices located in the north of Wales, Chester and just outside Bolton. Simon qualified as a dentist in 1982, served in the Parachute Regiment and previously owned a dental and whole body aesthetics clinic on Harley Street in London. He developed the concept of direct access in 2007 after working with Superdrug to put hygiene, whitening and aesthetic clinics in their stores. Also in 2007, so he's a busy guy this year, he took part in the Polar Challenge, a 320-mile race on skis to the magnetic North Pole. He is the current chair of the Metropolitan branch of the British Dental Association, or the BDA. Welcome to the show, Simon. Thank you very much for joining me. How are you?
Extremely well. Having, I suppose it's my first week back after 2 weeks holiday, so I'm slightly well rested, but now back into full flow, as it were.
Full flow. And do you need another holiday?
We've got one in May. Turkey.
Oh, perfect. Oh, very nice. That sounds fantastic. So Simon, I think I've mentioned before we started that you've got quite an impressive resume. I had to be very, very careful about, or not, I had to cut things out that I thought were really interesting, but just to shorten the intro.
I will meander through as we're going along, and then I will let you chivvy me along in places. So I'll start almost from the beginning, just to sort of give a feel for who I am, what I am, and my background.
Perfect.
So I'm originally born in Oldham in Lancashire. My father was a policeman. My mother was a nursery nurse. Nobody in my family have got anything to do with remotely medical in the past. I was fortunate enough to get into Manchester Grammar School. But there my main focus was just playing sport. Unfortunately, my father died when I was 16 years old, and he'd been ill for a few years before that. And therefore, I didn't really have any direction as to where I wanted to go in life. My mother wasn't really that interested, so I was just playing sport. At Manchester Grammar School back in those days, you're talking late 70s. Career advice is, I was good at sciences. Career advice is, do you want to be a doctor, a dentist, or a vet? And I just sort of said, well, which is the easiest one? Dentistry. I'll do dentistry then. So I applied for dental school, got into Manchester, carried on playing football, playing rugby, enjoying myself. And you're coming towards the end of your career. And even back then in dental school, career advice is not really there. The generally accepted thing was you just went out in the NHS and you applied your trade. I, however, because again I was sport, I had an older brother who'd gone into the military. I thought, I'm going to join the military. They play football, they play rugby, they do all these adventure training stuff. I'll do that. So I joined the army. After my first 6 months of military training, I was then posted out to a place called Rheindahlen in Germany, which is part of the old British Army of the Rhine. I found myself in a multi-chair practice, which was treating soldiers and the families. So I had the whole family bit there. It wasn't just sort of military. It was a massive base. We had three dentists and a hygienist in our practice. And you were basically taught dentistry. This is pre-vocational training or foundation training. It didn't exist then, but it was a sheltered post. You were taught to do dentistry at a fairly slow pace. It was effectively straight into private practice, but nobody had to pay anything. So there wasn't any cost in it at all. You were just doing it. But again, my main focus was still sport. I enjoyed sport. And I was slightly frustrated because my boss wasn't interested in sport, but I was. And I see everybody else in the military there just couple of mornings a week they're doing physical exercise. Every Wednesday afternoon they're on a sport and they're all doing adventure training, and my boss says no, don't do any of that, you need to be back in here. So I think so I was getting quite frustrated, and I suppose I've often used the term I'm an accidental dentist. I just wanted to play sport, but I'm a dentist. So I was then fortunate because although I didn't manage to do as much as I wanted to do, I was quite high profile sport wise within the dental corps. And they were reforming what's called a parachute field ambulance, and they needed a dentist to do this. So I was, as I said, fortunate to come back to Aldershot in the UK, and I did a parachute selection course. So the same parachute selection course the paras do, you do build-up training, and you have this mad 3-week selection procedure. You get through it all, and then you go and do parachute training at Bryce Norton, the RF Bryce Norton, and I was then the only dentist in a parachute field ambulance. Now, our role then back in 1982, my war role as a dentist is resuscitation. So it was a bit of dentistry, but the main thing was resuscitation. And back in those days in the dental schools, you were trained in anesthetics and resuscitation. I'm not quite sure much is done these days because it's all something else. But we were qualified to give general anesthetics, so that is the role I had. And our role was to go and rescue British nationals anywhere in the world, very similar to what's just happened in Afghanistan, where they go into Kabul, Parachute Regiment goes in. Well, we were the medical support to go with them. So we were sort of 120 strong as a field ambulance. We had surgeons, anaesthetists, and all the support that if they parachuted us in the middle of Africa, we could carry out major operations and keep the soldiers there until the next wave of people came to sort of help us do a little bit more. So fascinating stuff. And the beauty was that I spent 95% of my time not doing dentistry. So I was training to go and literally play soldiers and do all this. I thoroughly enjoyed it, my whole interaction with the Parachute Regiment. To such an extent, I managed to get onto a UN tour in Cyprus with 3-Para, 3rd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, and I effectively was doing an assistant operations job for them. Well, I'm meant to be doing a little bit of dentistry, but again, I was doing a little bit, and I enjoyed it so much that I thought, you know what, I don't really want to be a dentist. So I applied to join the Parachute Regiment. Parachute Regiment had seen what I was doing, thought I was a reasonably good guy, and they said, yes, you can come. You need to come to us for 6 months from the dental corps, and we'll train you, and you can carry on a transfer. Unfortunately, I'd upset so many people in the dental corps by this point because I wasn't doing any dentistry. They said, we're not going to, you can't go. And the Parachute Regiment, there's nothing we can do unless they let you go. We can't do anything. So I was, for the second time in my life, quite frustrated. And therefore, I literally put my papers in to leave. I said, right, that's it. I'm leaving the regular army. I came out of the regular army. And I actually then applied to come into the Parachute Regiment fully in the reserve forces, which I did. So I then become an infantry officer in the Parachute Regiment part-time. And I then come out into the big bad world of dentistry. Well, it wasn't so big and bad in those days. It was fairly benign. And again, a bit of word of mouth. I found a guy who was selling a practice in North London, a mixed practice. He was moving into Harley Street, selling a practice in North Finchley. So whilst I was negotiating to buy that, I was doing a bit of associate work down in Southend. But by late 1989, I bought this practice, a small mixed one-man private mixed NHS practice. We were about 50-50 private NHS. And so I carried on doing some dentistry, never owned a practice before, never been an associate outside the army before. But, you just jumped in and did it. And it was, I'm not saying it was easy, but you just did it. Yeah. Well, the thing that I found was the most difficult, I was so used to not charging anybody privately or even NHS. Even the NHS fees to me were, oh my goodness, they're massive. So I was a bit sort of cautious about it, but I was doing the dentistry I was trained to do in the army, which is very slowly, privately. And effectively, I worked out within the first 18 months, we'd lost something like £30,000. I said, I can't do this. So I had to make the decision. I either got to do what everybody else does, which is you embrace the system. And I often say that, more so these days, that the NHS is a bit like an abusive relationship. So all my peers 8 years ago had gone straight into the NHS. If you know nothing but the NHS, well, that's the normal. And as I say, if a normal relationship is abusive, well, it's just normal, isn't it? It's not abusive. I felt it was abusive because I had to cut the corners and speed up and do everything else that everybody else did in the NHS to survive. I said, I'm not doing it. I'm going private. That's it. Going private. So I converted my practice to private via DEM plan at the time. And I've been private ever since until I'll tell you at the end of my journey how I went back. Yeah. It was 1989. And I loved it. And I embraced the pursuit of excellence. We bought some lasers. Lasers were just starting to come into dentistry. So we had the first ND YAG laser in London at the time. And I went through the whole remit of erbium YAG, argon lasers, the whole thing, pursuit of excellence. And I just carried on, and it just becomes normal to an extent. And I bought a practice down the road. I got friendly with a couple of dentists who was getting slightly older. They wanted to sell their practice. So I said, okay, I'll bring my practice into your practice and we'll make a bigger practice. But within a year or so, the building we were in, which we leased, was going to be knocked down and built into a big yellow storage facility. So we had to we had to leave the premises. So I was already working part-time in Harley Street, just 8 miles down the road. So the decision was I either go back to the old building I was in at the top of the road, because I still own that building, or I moved to Harley Street. So I said, okay, guys, we're going to Harley Street. A sort of pursuit of excellence that I was doing, which is, where would you end up? Well, Harley Street, of course. So again, through the 2 guys that had already bought their practice, they introduced me to 2 other practices in Harley Street. So I put a whole package together to buy 2 more practices in Harley Street, which were 3 doors apart.
Oh my word!
So I put it all to NatWest Bank. I don't think NatWest Bank, NatWest is still about, but in those days, the business manager, you go and chat to him. Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, okay, it's fine. And we did it all. We ended up in Harley Street, and I had an aesthetic clinic down the road, which you mentioned, because I was very much into lasers, intense pulse light therapies, and we were doing effectively a whole body hair removal. I felt the whole aesthetic cosmetic. I was just doing basically just with general dentistry. And the beauty of Harley Street is that within our building, I had a dentist who did the implants, I had a dentist who did the endo. So you've all got it there. I focused on aesthetics. So much more, as people would talk about in those days, a bit of venereology. You're just doing veneers everywhere. And it's a bit slightly frowned upon these days. Went to the States, did the training course in the States. But in the background of all this was the CQC was starting to come. It started probably a few years before. And rules and regulations on running a dental practice. And it was becoming a bit of an admin nightmare. And the GDC was changing as well. They were becoming a little bit more frightening. In the old days, when it was run by dentists for dentists, it was fine. So I was thinking of, and also the modernization of dentistry, moving it from that cottage industry into a much more modern dental world. And although I would use at the time the word corporatization, that's got sort of the wrong connotations these days. Corporates are not necessarily good people, but the corporatization, we need to modernize it. And I almost felt that, there's 12,000 dental practices out there. Why do they have to reinvent the wheel every single practice about the CQC? Take that admin burden off them and just let them do dentistry. Whether it's in my practice in the north of England, wherever you are, local to you, your dentistry, the people, the staff, get on with it, and we'll do all that, dare I say, shit for you, and just get on and do the dentistry. So that's where I was going with the corporatization, where I felt it was going.
So Simon, before we go into that, there's a lot to unpack there. Like that is not your average dental backstory.
Yeah.
Normally it's your typical go to dental school, do your vocational if it existed then, and then straight to practice. But your adventures in the army sound fantastic.
And I do, to this day, I would say my best friends are military. Where do you go? Some are school friends, some are university friends, dental school friends, and then you find yourselves in dentistry, and you find yourself in this little world of only dentists. My world is military. I still go to dental dinners, but I do find myself sort of standing back a little bit and broadening your horizons. And also, I suppose I've carried on the physical side of things. Coming out of the military, I've climbed Mont Blanc a couple of times. And I think, as you mentioned previously, I did the Polar Challenge. I need physical challenges. So as soon as something comes across my radar, I think, well, that seems like a good idea. Yeah, we'll do that. Let's go and do it.
I want to talk about the Mont Blanc because I've just watched a documentary on Netflix called 14 Peaks. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but if you're into mountains, you should definitely watch it. It's basically a guy climbs the 14 8,000ers in 6 months. So I'm like, I want to climb Everest, but you've climbed the mountain. What's it like?
Well, and I think I mean, that whole the 8,000 peak ones, and you do get sucked into a lot of that. And I was almost going down that route, but you become slightly, you're running a business. I'm in the military, so although I'd left the regular army, I was still in the reserve forces. There was a time in those reserve forces I looked at 1 year and I'd done 250 days in the reserve forces. And there's only 365 in the year. So hang on, there's 250, that only leaves 110, and you're running a dental practice. How do you do that? And so it was becoming, so I almost didn't have time to do a lot of the stuff. And it was coming more when I was winding down the military. I'd gone so far in the military in the reserve forces, and I had to go back to what we'd call normal military, from airborne and specialist units. So I thought, no, I don't want to do that. So I effectively stopped the military. And that's when I started to do much more on the dental development and bring that up and bring, in a way, your experience and your drive and everything you do into the dental side of it. And that's when I started to sort of, in a way, replace the military bit with climbing mountains and get involved in that. But you do then get sucked into, what am I going to do next? You know, shall I do the 5 peaks, 6 peaks, 7 peaks? What do you want to do? But climbing Mont Blanc is an experience. And it's the first time, you know, I went up the first time with 4 people who'd never been up before. And, you know, when you do get up towards the top, the last day, when you go from what's called the Gouta hut upwards, and we set off, and none of us had done it. We're all roped together, and we're setting off 2 o'clock in the morning, pitch black. There's all these lights going up beside the Mont Blanc. You're generally following them up. But we set off, and we were taking about 100 paces, but I was the lead person. The rope behind me kept going tight. So everybody was stopping at slightly different times. They thought, oh, I want to take a breath. But when you're roped together, you can't do it. So we said, okay, this is all a bit silly. We're learning as we go. We'll take 100 paces. We'll stop, make sure everyone's okay, and we'll carry on. By the time we got to the top, we could literally physically only take 10 paces before we had to stop and take more breath. You just couldn't get the breath. And we just kept going and going. And, you know, again, my philosophy, military philosophy, is keep putting one foot in front of the other and you get there. And so that's how you get to the top. And that's how you did it. And it was an amazing experience to stand up there, you know, top of Europe and look out. And there's a beautiful, clear blue sky. Amazing. Came all the way down. And then I went back a few years later with an ex-army mate, ex-military mate. And we went up by a back route because there was something wrong with some of the lifts on the other side. We couldn't get up. We had to go around the back route. And that was the route, when you look back on it historically, where there've been most of the deaths through avalanches are going up that back route. And some of the slides I've got showing you the stuff we went up, I mean, we didn't really know what we were going into, but we were just, you know, you get your ice axe, you get your crampons, and
wing it.
And we got to the top. And then you go on to the Polar Challenge was the next one, which was, again, I suppose I never really got the concept of, even, you know, someone intelligent like me, that the North Pole actually is just all ice. So you're on there and you're just walking on ice. I mean, the South Pole's land and you're walking across land, but it's sort of until you get there and you're actually walking across this stuff for sort of 9 days and you're not on any land, you're thinking, this is a bit weird. It's a bit bizarre that you're actually walking on the sea. But the fact is, because the ice is flowing away, you know that the steps you're taking, no one has ever been there before. No one's ever been on that bit of ice before, because it's new ice, and it's sort of a slightly surreal sensation. So we were just navigating. We had GPS, a fairly basic GPS, but at that time of year, the sun never sets, so it just circles around you. You know what time of day it is. You know which direction you're going by the sun, unless there's a complete whiteout, in which case you're trying to get your GPS, you're trying to go forward, you're stumbling along, and it's just, but again, it's that one step at a time. Every journey, those classic quotes, one step at a time, the journey's this long, and you get there. No matter what you do, keep going, keep going, keep going. Amazing experience.
It's so cool. So cool. So because talking to a lot of practice owners, running any business is difficult, but a dental practice can be, it's a different beast. Do you think your army experience and the physical challenge you've done, they've kind of prepared you for it, or helped you in any way?
I think it certainly gives you a different perspective. It gives you a perspective that if people put barriers in front of you, you find a way around them. Everybody has challenges in life, and you either come up to a roadblock and then throw your arms up and say, "Oh, I just think nothing I can do," or you find a way around it. And you also need to, how do you put it? That there are negative people in the world and there are positive people. What you need to do is find the positive people, and also if people and everybody in life has had. I hesitate to use it, but been shat on by people. People do bad things to you. Now, my philosophy has always been, did he really or she really need to do that? Or I'll give you another chance. If they do it again, just, okay, go over there. You're just a bad person. Just go and find the good people. There are lots of bad people, and all the bad people can go and talk to the bad people. But if you want to get on in life, find the good people, find the people who are interested in you as much as you're interested in them, and go with those people. So again, that pursuit of excellence, it first started with me, I suppose, the realization when you're in the airborne forces and you were dealing with guys in the Parachute Regiment who've done a selection process. So, they've all done this selection process. And you go on and within airborne forces, you do other selection processes. And we've all done this. We're all of the same mentality. We're all going the same way. And on you go. In the same in a way in a dental practice, you can target your practice at a certain level. And if you're in private practice and you do nice things to those people, you're not trying to rip them off. You're just trying to earn a living, give them a good service, charge what it is, and you give them a good service. They're going to tell other people, all at the same social level, and their friends will come. If you do, dare I say, amazing work for no money down at the bottom end, then they'll tell even more people down at the bottom end who don't want to pay for you either. So you can only treat, in an NHS practice, you have about 2,500 patients. In private practice, 1,500. You choose who those 1,500 are, and they'll keep coming back, and their friends will keep referring people. And so that's in a way where I would go to. And the other thing that I think that we did in our day, which is do much more of general dentistry rather than I have to specialize tomorrow, I have to do this after this. There's an element of that's where we are. And as we'll come on to, it's why we've got to buy and sell practices. I've got to be an owner. I've got to do this. Think differently. Why do I have to do that? Do general practice. Everybody, the younger generation, are now going to live till they're 80, 90, 100. I plan to live till I'm 120. I'm only ever halfway to my age. So I'm 63 now. I'm going to live to 126. But I'm going to enjoy the next 40 years because I enjoy what I do. But if you find yourself in a job which you, dare I say, don't like, and you don't like NHS dentistry, I can't see you doing it for the next 40 years. But don't necessarily think you have to do what you want to do tomorrow. You're on a journey. You need to enjoy yourself. You need to enjoy what you do. And we'll come on to ownership and how much time you spend doing that. Do the dentistry, carry on doing it, and plan for the next. And don't worry about changing. You don't have to decide tomorrow. We're all going to be a long time dead. You've got a long time to work, and it may be in 30 years' time you change your career. But dentists should only ever really be working 4 days a week hard, and you need to get the rest of the time to do your admin, sort yourself out, do the other things. So try and slow down a bit, and don't try and rule the world tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, Simon, I think that's great advice. I think that's great advice for anyone, really. But I think we're all in a rush, aren't we? Especially like the social media and stuff. Everyone's putting their best lives on social media, and we're all trying to get there quickly. But you've got, I know things can happen, but you have generally got time to take your time, enjoy the journey. I think is the most important thing.
You're absolutely right. And as much as I say, pick the right people, some people are all about the me, and don't necessarily have to keep up with the Joneses. Just because they're top 50 dentists in the magazine, it doesn't mean anything. There's thousands of dentists out there, thousands. Just calm down, enjoy what you're doing, and as much enjoy what you do outside dentistry as you do inside dentistry. we within Future Health Partnership are developing much more of a health and wellness product. We as a dentist, I know that we have thousands and thousands of patients come to see us twice a year, every year, for dental health check and to look after them. What else can we do for those people to make them healthier? So we've started some basic health screening recently in our practices where we test for blood cholesterol and blood glucose. People don't know what their blood cholesterol and glucose is. It's sort of highlighted within the COVID era. If you have an underlying medical condition, you're more prone to getting COVID. And if you get COVID, more prone to have serious complications. But nobody's doing any testing on anybody. The NHS is so busy chasing its tail or putting more money in the big black hole of bottomless pit that no one's doing it. But half the population go to the dentist every single year. And for the sake of a tiny finger prick and blood and 2 minutes, we can test you. So we've started to do that. And I think the whole health and wellness, both of our patients, because nobody else is doing it, and we will trust them, and ourselves as dentists, which is more about this, sit back a minute, whoa, what about your health and wellness? What about what you're doing and how you're doing it? You need to live a long time. Don't burn yourself out. So we're doing much more of that now, and the partnership route, which is about enjoying your dentistry and having to do all the admin stuff is a bit, no one enjoys that. You're a dentist, so enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah. Simon, before we go further into Future Health Partnership, I just want to go back to your first foray into ownership. What did you learn in those first 12 months? I
mean, in a way, I can't say I learned anything apart from 18 months later, we lost a lot of money by doing NHS dentistry in private rules. And my perception is that the NHS has got worse every single year since. You had the new contract in 2006. Well, I'd left well before that. And one of the difficulties of that 2006 contract was that then suddenly the Treasury knew exactly where they had dentistry, and dentistry was suddenly off the agenda. They were fighting up until then to try and control the dental budget. Suddenly, you have fixed contracts. The Treasury know exactly what they're spending on dentistry. That's it. And in a way, that is the biggest reason why we haven't changed that contract since 2006, because the Treasury don't want to. They don't want to have another free-for-all and go back to it. So despite everything that NHS England and Improvement tried to do, despite what previous dental officers, chief dental officers tried to do, the Treasury will not let the strings go. And that, to me, the quite appalling thing that they've done to the practices that were running the trials. Well, I can't remember, word forgets me now. There were two blended types of contracts. They've just thrown them off a cliff. They've been doing it for 3 years. They said, "Oh no, we're not doing them anymore." And suddenly we're in now. Yeah, we'll get a new contract here. Well, the new contract year started. I'm not quite sure it's official or unofficial yet. Is it 95? Is it 100%? I think it's 95%, isn't it? You still, to the last day, you were waiting. You didn't know what you were doing. Everyone's struggling to do 80%, and we think we're going to have to do 95%. It's quite frankly, it's appalling, and we do need to do a lot more about that. But if you get out of it into private practice, then you don't have to worry about it.
Got it. Perfect. That's brilliant. So let's talk about Future Health Partnership. What is it? We've talked about it in little snippets, but what is it in general? Why did you start it? What was the driving force?
Again, another one of my journeys was as I was working in Harley Street, and I was doing something called Small Store, which we may or may not touch on. But I was approached by one of the clinical directors for what was at the time the second largest corporate company called ADP. He's a guy I knew from the military, and he was the clinical director. He said, "Look, I'm getting on a bit. I want to slow down to part-time and then retire. We're looking for a new clinical director. Would you be interested?" And it was at the time when I was looking at the corporatization of dentistry, and I'd got a few practices in Harley Street, and I'd ventured into Small Store where we had 3 practices, direct access effectively before direct access was allowed. Again, I was pushing the boundaries a little bit of what is allowed and isn't allowed. We had clinics in Superdrug stores, but he came along and do you want to be the clinical director of an organization that has 120 practices? I thought, that's a big stepping stone, so we'll go there. So I applied for the job. Fortunately, I got it. I think there were 5 others going for it. I got the job. So I'm now the clinical director for ADP. And the good and bad of that is I had to give up all my other dental bit because it was all a conflict of interest. So I'm now a director of a myriad of companies, to be honest, that are ADP, 120. But you then enter the world of private equity. And I'm quite open in the years I've been since that, to me, private equity and healthcare shouldn't mix. It's all right, private equity being involved in supply chain, building hospitals, providing infrastructure. But as soon as they start to get involved in affecting decision-making in dentistry, healthcare is a unique business. Dentistry is even more unique in that it's a diagnosis, a treatment plan, and you're doing the treatment. And if that is slightly twisted by a private equity people who, at the end of the day, are about the money. And when they stop thinking about the money, they think about the money again. And I saw that every Monday morning in the boardroom. It wasn't about dentistry. It wasn't about healthcare. It was about money. Now, publicly, they'll say something different. It's all about the patient. It's all about, at the end of the day, the returns required by private equity are, to me, incompatible with healthcare when you're affecting treatment decision-making. So I was in there, I was clinical director for a year, and I also saw the business model effectively wasn't working as they were doing it. And we were fortunate, or ADP was taken over whilst I was there. But I was then having a bit of a battle with a guy who had been the chief financial officer, then became the acting chief executive. He and I didn't get on. I'm trying to do dentistry, doing the right thing. We lost 30% of our staff every single year in ADP. We had to go and replace 30%. Now, you talk to anybody in business, and if you're losing 30% of your staff, one, you're doing something wrong. But his solution was just go and get some more. Just go and get some more.
That is a super high turnover rate, isn't it? That's a huge turnover rate.
So we were out in East Europe bringing dentists in, as many as we could get. It was just plugging the holes. And so with a bit of a disagreement, I'm there as, in a way, the gatekeeper to keep the GDC away, trying to develop some clinical excellence, trying to do the right thing for our dentists, our nurses, our receptionists. But basically, the business is just being trashed. I was sacked. I had a disagreement with him. I was sacked. The business was taken over. ADP and IDH joined to form my dentist. But my experience of private equity, so I sat then, as I'm sitting now, in my flat in Harley Street, thinking, well, I'm a dentist. I believe in dentistry. What is the future business model for dentistry? I believed in the corporatization of it, but I don't believe in the private equity model. So what else is there? Fortunately, at the bottom of Harley Street here is John Lewis. So I thought, John Lewis, they're a retailer. People seem to like John Lewis. The staff love working there. It's some sort of partnership thing. But what is it? There are good and bad retailers. There are some are driven by the share price, the Philip Greens of this world, buy, sell, Ashleys of this world. It's all about the money. And John Lewis just get on with it, and then, so what is it? So I sort of, in a way, distilled John Lewis down, and the fundamental is partnership stroke employee ownership. So I thought, how would that work in dentistry then, if that is the business model that works there? And so I then looked at starting to develop the business model of partnership, where it's not the dentists that own the business, which previously only dentists have been allowed to own businesses. But obviously now anybody who's GDC registered, in theory, can own a business. But it should be owned by the receptionists, the nurses, everybody in a general dental practice. We're all doing this. Dentists, there are some very good dentists who are very good businessmen, but some are pretty crap, to be honest. And you just want to do dentistry. So why is it the dentist owns the business? Because it's about treating the patients. And when the dentist goes, the staff will stay, and they're local, and they're treating the patients. So let's own this as a partnership. We're all going to gain. The dentist is always going to be, in a way, earning more money, because that's the way the hierarchy works. But you should get the reward commensurate with your salary. But we're all in this together. We should all be making the decisions. It's not about me, and even more so buying and selling and this and this. Dentistry as a dentist should give you a good living. You should be able to earn a good amount of money and you need to enjoy yourself. I would say, buy a house, go property. If you want to be a millionaire, then you're in the wrong industry. Okay, you should be in banking, you should be in finance, you should be somewhere else. You should be comfortable. And I do acknowledge that it's more difficult these days for the younger generation, given the debt they come out with and what they might have to pay for a dental practice. And we'll come on to why you shouldn't buy a dental practice later. So the business model started a future health partnership. The difficulty I found myself in at the time was I'm then competing against private equity to buy practices, and what they're paying for practices don't make sense. Because if I buy a practice, I have to go and borrow the money from the bank. I haven't got £10 million in my back pocket or a private equity fund of 30 million to buy it, which I'm going to flog them down the line and get the money back. Our philosophy is we will never sell a practice. Once we own it, we own it. And when I'm well dead, someone will carry on, because it's about the staff. It's about those local people who own it. So I have to go and borrow the money, and therefore the money has to be repaid over the 20-year loan by the practice, and therefore the practice has to earn the money to pay it. But if I'm paying twice as much as I can borrow, it just doesn't make sense, which is why, in a way, we've been quite slow, but we've stuck to our guns as to who we are, what we are. So it's about partnership. So we got 4 practices, and we've been tweaking the business model recently. But effectively, it is about trying to develop this. It's not about me. It's about the patients. It's about the staff. And it's about a healthcare business. And it's about developing that model. John Lewis is 120 years old. It took them years and years and years to start to grow where they are. So in 120 years' time, they may turn around and say, Simon Gallier, he started this. I may be dead by then. I don't know. But it's not about me. It's not about Simon Gallier. It's about the concept. It's a bit like John Lewis. It was John Lewis's son, John Spedden Lewis, who started it, and he's well dead now. But it carries on, and the philosophy carries on, and that's what it is about.
That's key. So yeah, that's awesome, Simon. You mentioned it when we first met, the dental show. Like, I was like, sounds fascinating. Like, and it's like you're not reinventing the wheel. You're just taking a concept from a different industry and bringing it to dentistry, which, I totally agree with you. I've only been in it a few years, but you can see some of the problems, and you can see some of the things that you mentioned. Yeah, and this could be a proper game changer.
I've been around the block a few times, and you gather a lot, a lot of people, you bring different perspectives into life, but it is about, it's a long journey. It's a long journey. You don't have to do it all tomorrow. Take your time, and just fundamentally, it is about trying to enjoy yourself.
Yes, exactly. Now, you've touched on, actually, you mentioned a few times, like why you shouldn't buy and sell a practice. So I think that's something we should definitely touch on, because there's probably people listening that are either considering it or have just done it, and they probably just want to, just discuss the options really.
I think at the end of the day, the demographics of who does dentistry these days have changed. My day, dare I say, it was WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. My dental year was 90% male, rugby playing males, and that was it. And clearly that has changed over the years. And there always still will be people who want to own a dental practice, and unfortunately that is, to me, quite a dated model now. Why do you want to own a dental practice? You're a dentist. You need to have the skills. In the old days, it was easier, therefore you did. But now, because of that, the admin burden, if you own a practice, I think you need to consider, and again, I suppose I can look back, and I am slightly different, I suppose, obviously, but it's still a 24/7 job. What you need to try and consider is the hours and hours and hours every week you will spend running that business, which are not paid. And could that be 30 hours on top of your clinical, because the staff are going to come to you. You're going to have to make decisions, and you do them at weekends, you do them in the evenings. As an associate, you go in 9 to 5, close the door, go home, carry on doing what you're doing. Ownership sounds wonderful. Go and borrow a few £1 million from the bank, buy this, be terrified about paying it all back and have all the hassle as well. So if you got 30 hours, I would say, instead of doing that, of those 30 hours a week you would spend doing the ownership, put 10 back into clinical, work some more, spend 10 hours going out doing some physical things, and 10 hours with your family and friends and enjoying yourself. And probably 20, 30, 40 years down the line, you'll be healthy, wealthier, and a lot happier than if you own this business. And you're mortgaging yourself up to the hilt in the hope that in 20 years' time, you're going to get it back again. Well, it's a bit, if you do it right, you'll have that money down the line in 20 years' time by doing the right things, but you'll have enjoyed yourself a lot more. You'll have got out a lot more, and you won't be as stressed. But the traditional dental model is we buying and selling. And that's obviously hyped up even more since the 2006 contract, when in my day, I could go across the street, put a dental chair in there, see NHS patients and send the bill to the NHS and they'd pay it. Now you can't do that. And therefore the value of those NHS contracts have gone up. And with the corporates trying to buy them, the value, you have to pay ridiculous amounts of money. So I've started to now think, as well as what we're continuing to do in terms of future health partnership, is there another business model which actually you don't want to buy a practice, just set one up. And we're trying to come up with sort of an outsourcing model at the moment, which we'll develop over the next couple of months, that will do all the admin for you. You don't have to worry about it. Because, as I say, CQC, regulation, it's the same in every dental practice. So you know nothing about it. You have to go from zero to learning everything about it. But we know all about it. The original concept, as I come back to the start of FHP, was to take that admin burden off you and let you do the dentistry. But we were owning the practice. So I'm now thinking, well, why do we own the practice? Oh, no. You can actually own the chair and that, and we'll do all the admin for you. But we know all about that, but we'll do everything for you. You don't have to worry about it. Just go and do the dentistry, focus on it. And because you don't have to borrow as much as you would have done, you just need to lease a chair over 5 years, pay it, and we'll get connections with leasing companies and we'll set it all up for you. It may be, again, we're chewing a few ideas over the moment, the concept at the moment of office sharing, WeWork, that concept. Okay, I'll go and use an office. Well, we can have a whole suite of dental surgeries here. Just book a chair, come and treat a patient. We'll provide everything for you. And it's 24/7. Not that you want to work 10 o'clock in the evening, but you might want to work weekends. It's open there. It's all the facilities there. So we need to think of dentistry differently than that old model of buying and selling practices, particularly when the model is skewed by the private equity boys who don't care about our future as a profession. It's their money. And I do believe that they are skewing the model and they've driven the price of those up. You open any magazine at the moment and everyone's telling you about how to maximize the value of your practice and get the most for it. So you're there looking at buying practices and all you're seeing is everyone's trying to maximize. So you're going to pay even more for this practice. Well, and that's, the market. So how can you argue the market? Well, don't do the market. So you could be, for example, working as an associate in an NHS practice 5 days a week, 3 days a week. Well, just set up a private practice, come to an outsourcer, that could be us in a few months' time, that will do all the admin for you and just start to see some patients. It's almost a no-brainer. Don't buy a practice, don't spend fortunes.
So I love that. I also love the idea of a We Dental. That could be, you heard it here first, guys. when Simon opens that up and is everywhere, you know where he first mentioned it.
I also do think that we need to embrace much more on the health and wellness side of things. That as well as just being a dentist, you need to look at what else. And it's not necessarily you that does it as a dentist, but once you're seeing patients and patients who have chosen to go private or chosen to go down a plan, whether it's practice plan, whatever, they've already invested in their health and therefore they're already down the road. The half the population that don't go to the dentist, but they've not invested in any health. They're not going to do it. But it doesn't take much to say, what else can we do for you? What else can, and the whole health and wellness environment. I think, dentists for too long now have almost sat at the kiddie table of healthcare. We're almost a bit of dog poo on the shoe of the Department of Health. Just bloody dentists. Just get rid of them. We've never been part of healthcare, which obviously comes to the fore in COVID. We were the perfect people to be doing vaccinations, but oh no, you've got to jump through all these hoops. We'd rather have some unqualified pharmacists doing that. Pharmacists are totally into the NHS system. Everybody else is, but dentists are just sort of. So we as a profession need to raise ourselves up, raise our profile. We're just as highly qualified as anybody else in this profession. We are oral specialists. We all know we go to dental school, and the first bit is anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry. Just as much as the medics do, and the medics are, in a way, just masters of nothing. They do the whole body. How can you know everything about the whole body? We're specialists in a head, neck, face, but we don't get no credit from it. Possibly driven by the fact that the NHS has always been about just drill and fill, fast and furious, drill and fill, fast and furious. Get on with it. We need to, in a way, the post-COVID era is an opportunity for us to really raise the profile of the profession, change what we're doing, a new way of working, and let's just brush away those old things that have gone on in the past. Don't worry about the old farts who've done it that way for so long. The young, vibrant dentists of the future. Let's create a new world, a new way of doing things. That's what I hope for the profession, and that's why I've got to live to 120, because we've got to make it happen.
Yeah, I was going to say you've got a lot to do, Simon. Honestly, Simon, I could listen to you all day. You've got some fantastic opinions and fantastic ideas. But I would love to ask you right now. So, what would be your number one piece of advice for anyone thinking about starting or buying a practice? I think I kind of already know, but I want to hear it from your voice.
I would say don't do it. Don't do it. I don't think that is the way to go. I think learn your trade, and I would say don't learn your trade in the NHS. I think NHS associates, that is a dying breed. Have confidence that you can go into a private practice and just start slowly. The patients are just the same patients. They're not expecting. I suppose you almost read magazines about how wonderful these treatments are. 90% of dentistry out there is just basic routine dentistry. And you need to have that ability to sit down. I always say that, the initial consultation with the patient is 50% understanding that person. Every single person who walks in your surgery is a unique human being. There isn't another one like them. Until you know them, you can't start to treat them. So understand who they are first, and then have a look in the mouth, understand what they are. Clearly, you might have to deal with something as an emergency. If they've come in for an emergency, you need to deal with that. But then take a step back and offer them the options. But it's not about doing it all tomorrow and doing the most highly skilled whatever. It's about maintaining people. 90% of dentistry is about just maintaining, doing the odd filling that breaks, checking for a little bit of decay, just doing something. It's not about full mouth rehabilitations. It's not about, blimey. But you reading some of the private dentistry magazines, you'd believe that's what everybody's doing. But it isn't. General dental practice is general dental practice. And you've got many, many years to do it. You don't have to be highly qualified. You're a dentist. Learn your trade. Enjoy what you're doing. But for goodness sake, try and get out of the NHS.
So fantastic. That's probably advice that people want to hear, but probably didn't expect. So that's great. But Simon, honestly, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I'll probably get you on again in the future when you've cracked the John Lewis model.
Yeah.
But if people are interested in contacting you, how can they reach you?
I'm on the net, easily findable. Future Health Partnership, or just simon.gallier@gmail.com is the easiest email. Or speak to you about my mobile number. I'm happy to talk to people anytime about anything. It's about sharing ideas. If people can be bothered to ring me up, I'll be bothered to answer it. Pick the phone up. 07889 725 343. 07889 725 343. I'll take my phone off the hook now for a few days.
Yeah, I'm going to say you regret doing that. But no, honestly, Simon, I'll add those to the show notes.
Okay.
But honestly, thank you so much, and I'm so glad that I bumped into you dressed as an astronaut at the dental show a few weeks ago.
Pleasure speaking to you, Mike. We'll chat again soon.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Cheers, mate.